everybody doing?
Fine.
Wow, we're going to work on that. They put me after lunch for a reason. So my name's Steve Gates. I am the Head Design Evangelist at InVision. I am also the host of the Crazy One podcast, which I've done for about 2.5 years. What that means is that I travel around the world basically working as a therapist, an interventionist, a coach, and a teacher for the world's best creative teams. And so what I want to talk about today are a few of the things that I've sort of seen. And one of the things for me is that this is everybody's favorite slide, because since I speak all over the world, I like to do this crazy thing and actually have people listen to me. As great as it is to talk to the top of everyone's head, you can download this entire slide deck here. So take a photo of it now, and we're going to do this crazy thing where we actually listen to each other. It's kind of weird. I only have 17 minutes. Take a photo fast. Okay, we're moving on. So what I want to do for the next 20 minutes or so is I want us to be honest, right? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm known for is honest. And it's not a typo, right? Like, it's honest with a capital H. Everybody wants to talk about design with a capital D. We're going to be honest with a capital H, which means I want to be honest about what is actually going on in the world today and what are some of the things that are holding back people from breaking through, from being more innovative, because I travel all over the world and everybody uses the word innovation like they know what it means. And the problem is that's not always necessarily the case. So I think that there are two simple truths as we talk about emotional innovation here today. The first one of these truths is going to be, and I got to keep this, there we go. First truth. Come on. There we go. Every company in the world is dysfunctional. Whatever the company is you love the most, whichever one you think has it down exactly right, whichever one you think is the greatest thing in the entire world is just as screwed up as yours is. They probably just hide it better. Because I can tell you, I've worked with Apple and Google and Facebook and Nike and everybody else, and guess what? They all have problems. The problem is that we all come to events like this and we all look at each other and we put on this mask and tell everybody how great it is and how perfect our company is and how wonderful everything is, whenever behind the scenes, everything is on fire. And so I think that's the big thing for me as we sort of go through this, really is the fact, come on, you're killing me. One more. Okay, so like the hope and possibility, and I've said this for about the better part of a decade right now, is that, we really have the ability to affect business in ways we have not seen since the Industrial Revolution. The problem is that the vast majority of those people are struggling to figure out how to break through. And so what we referenced before is that in InVision, we actually took the time to do the world's largest look at design maturity. It was the world's largest look at what is the actual state of design and creativity in the world today. And so we looked at that, and there were 5 different levels to this study. We talked to 2,200 different companies. We talked to 34 different countries, 22 different industries. And the thing that you see is that whenever you actually stack up all of this data, you'll find that 83% of the world's companies, 83%, are in the middle to bottom to figuring out how to be more creative and how to be innovative. 83%. So whatever the problems are you're having, congratulations, the person next to you are probably having them as well, and this is the challenge that we're dealing with. But this is why, for me, as we talk about creativity, we talk about design, resurgence in design thinking, design sprints, all this stuff. The challenge is that we're trending towards this stuff being just a moment. And the other part that has come along with this is as our companies have struggled, I see creative leaders start to struggle all the time. And I think that the reason why they struggle is really because of the fact that, whenever you go through this, there's another truth that really belongs with this. And that is that at their core, every single person who is creative feels broken inside. I love everybody who just started smirking and nudging the person next to them or tried to suddenly not to make eye contact because you know that it's true. And I don't mean creative by the fact that you're a designer. I mean creative in the fact that if you write code, if you write words, if you design, if you try and start a company, there's always that quiet little moment when you're like, oh my God, I'm screwing this up and I'm so alone, right? Circle of trust, therapy, okay, so we're working on it, good. But I think that this is really the part of this, is that what happens with so much of this is that we're in this era where we compare our insides to everybody else's outsides, right? I would love for Halloween this year if everybody went as who they pretended to be on social media. It would be amazing, right? Because everybody's profile photo is like them looking into a sunset with a bald eagle on their shoulder and talking about how perfect they are and how amazing their creative process is, and quite candidly, it's all bullshit, right? But that's what we do. We lie to each other all the time. And that this is what's leading to this. So what I want to talk about today is I really want to talk about if we're going to make change, if we are going to do something differently, then I think what we have to do is we have to look at two things. We have to look at the we, and we have to look at the you. Now, the we is going to be things like your company, things like your team, things like your culture. And I've just got 20 minutes today, right? So I think we're going to go through this decently fast. But the you is going to be the part about your confidence, your process, and your insecurity. Now, some of the things we're going to touch on, like I said, I have a very short amount of time, so we're just going to touch on it. So the other part is in the link that you could go to get this presentation. There are episodes that I have devoted the last 2.5 years of my life putting together a podcast to talk about these sort of things, because it irritates me so much whenever I do these talks and people come up after me and they're like, oh my God, it's so fantastic because you're honest. If you make that statement, you need to reevaluate the company that you're working at and the people that you surround yourself with. Because honesty should not be a rare thing. And the fact that, again, in this age of social media that it is a huge problem. So, what I want to start to talk about first is we. Because so many companies, whenever I come and I talk to them, what they want to talk about is how can we be more innovative? How can we do these sort of things differently? And whenever we do that, there are kind of two things that I want to talk about that I think are going to help with this. The first is that every single company, whenever I talk to them, whenever I talk about how they want to change, to do something different, I will go and talk to them about something called cognitive bias, which is probably the least sexy term in the world whenever you actually want to do something about innovation. Now, cognitive bias is the trend that whenever you travel the world, you see people who are creative, you see that they all have the same problem. That for some reason, nobody understands why they're creative. They have a hard time getting their ideas through, a lot of these sort of things. Cognitive bias is the reason why. Now, whenever you do this, it's because it's just something that is hardwired into us, something that is in our brain that makes it really, really difficult for us to deal with some things. Now, there are 12 different types of cognitive bias. We are not going to talk about all of them today. We're just simply going to talk about two of them. We're going to talk about confirmation and observation bias. Now, confirmation bias is something that a lot of people do unconsciously, which means that what you do is that you will surround yourself with people who agree with you. So there's you, and you surround yourself with people who think that you are brilliant, who love everything that you do, who tell you that you are fantastic. And that one person who tells you that you could do better, we don't like to talk to them. Because that's the problem, right? But the problem is for so many teams, if you surround yourself with people who think like you, look like you, act like you, pretty soon then you can't figure out why your work is mediocre. I can tell you why. But this is part of our challenge, is like, how do we actually go through and deliberately seek out different perspectives? The best companies I work with will actually hire so that they will hire people who have different views. Because the ability to do that tension creates incredibly, incredibly effective work. Now, the next one to be able to talk about for this is observation selection bias. The names are super sexy. But I think that, again, we're in Germany. Cars seem like a great example to be able to use. So whenever you actually where you want to buy a car, you start to think about a model. Maybe you start to think about a particular brand. And then all of a sudden, this amazing thing happens. That what happens is all of a sudden, you see that car everywhere. I'm a genius. This is fantastic. This car is so popular. My decision must be right. The exact same thing happens with creativity. Whenever we suddenly get an insight, whenever we think we have a good idea, isn't it amazing how all of a sudden we see the excuse and the reason why that happens everywhere around us? And so again, it's the ability to not run to say this is what the answer is. And that's one of the toughest things for people to do, is to not say this is the answer. Because whenever you do that, you get the same little dopamine hit whenever you unlock your phone or where you get a like on social media. It is a chemical dependency that actually happens with people. It's crazy. This is why we actually now officially have a shorter attention span than goldfish. That's a fact. But I think the other thing is to think about if you want to start to change this, because in many companies, there's this sort of tension between process and culture. And I think what happens is that if you have just all process, you have people who just check boxes, right? They go through and they do things because someone told them to. But now, on the other hand, if all you have is culture, now, whenever you just have culture, I have a lot of people who are really empowered, but they're just running around making a mess because there's no structure. So the thing that you're really looking for is the balance between these two, which is that there are behaviors. Because most of the time what I see is companies say we need a new mission statement, we need new values, we need a lot of stuff that sounds really interesting and looks great in the press, but is completely meaningless to the people that work at the company. So a few examples of this would be, because I think what these behaviors need to do is like you need something that's really going to take on the pink elephants in your company. Everybody in your company knows what the problems are. Nobody talks about it. And so those pink elephants are just the problems that sit out there. And so a few examples of what this would be things like we're going to put the customer at the center of everything we do, right? So this is going to take on the projection bias because so many companies want to fight about who's right. Is tech right? Is product right? Who's right? Who cares? Because if that's what matters, if the internal battle is what matters, congratulations, your work sucks because your consumers are not being talked to at all. But so I think you need to be able to have these things, like invite diverse perspectives to the table. Actually getting people to work together, such a novel idea. But if you have collaboration issues, and what this does is that this allows everybody to agree on how are we going to work and then hold each other accountable. But that's great. Everybody, there's always a them, right? It's always easy to blame the company, but we're not getting off the hook that easily. Because one of the biggest things that I see right now is this insane rise in design imposter syndrome, which is that creative people stop themselves, right? Like this is why stupid people are successful. Because they are unencumbered by the fear of getting something wrong. They will just keep failing and doing it over and over again. The smart, self-conscious people who actually worry about things will stop themselves. So what I want to talk about is there are 5 different types of design imposters. And the interesting part about this is that I can guarantee you out of this, you are absolutely one or more of them. And I'm going to know by the look in your eyes whenever each one comes up, which one you think you are. And the best part is the people who you work with probably already know it. You just think you're hiding it from them. And I guarantee you, you're probably not. Like I said, therapy, intervention, circle of trust, Fokker. It's all good. The first one is the perfectionist. Perfectionists are really interesting because these are people who really think that they have to get it right. They have to get it perfect the first time. And if they don't, then man, there's all this self-doubt, there's all this problems. I'm not sure if I really know what it is that I'm doing. Like a great way to be able to spot this is these are people who have trouble delegating. They have problems, especially like if you're a creative or something like that, like giving work to somebody else is like skinning yourself alive, right? It's like, don't do that, don't put that there, don't use that typeface, why are you using that color? Oh, please move. Like that is your internal struggle and you're like, no, but I trust you, right? Like keep it all on the inside. All of you just thought of somebody who that happened with like this week. But that's the thing is that this is what perfectionists do is you're constantly like, oh, it just would have been better if I would have done it. And I think a lot of this is then to really sort of, how do you figure out how to push yourself to act before you're ready? How do you push yourself to trust other people, right? Because that idea of getting sort of exposed if it's not perfect, this is why at so many companies, perfectionists rule, because the problem is that they think everything has to be perfect, and they expect everyone else to be perfect, as opposed to in creativity is a big mess. That's not the way that it works. And so that's why when something goes wrong, instead of investing in everyone coming together and fixing it, what everyone invests in is a lot of emails figuring out who's to blame. Again, you all just thought of somebody. The superwoman or the superman. This is somebody who feels like they are a phony who is working alongside real talent. These are people who really understand what they're doing and that they're the ones that are really getting it right, and I'm just sort of coasting along here with them. And I think that one of the things with them is like, these are people are easy to spot. Because these are the people that whenever their work is done, they still stay at the office to work. Because they're going to prove how smart they are. They're going to prove how good they are. I love all the people who just nudge somebody next to them. They're like, you know, and it's like, I know, that's you. But this is the thing, is that we want to prove, and we're going to do it by showing up more than anybody else does. And so I think, you start this by figuring out how do you veer away from external validation. I see so many people, I coach so many executives who are so caught up in trying to be who they think they're supposed to be that they miss who they are. Because there are so many of these people where it's like, this is why for me I have the words, here's the crazy ones tattooed on my right arm. This is not some Apple fanboy tattoo. This is a reminder of how I need to show up every day. That I need to show up and to be honest and to be able to do this. Like these are problems that have gotten to the point with me that I have marked my body permanently to deal with these problems. You have the genius. The genius is somebody that feels like their success is based on their ability. So if they don't get it right the first time, they failed. And that's really what they're looking for, is that they are always smart enough to be able to do these sort of things. And these are the people, like the idea of having a mentor is absolutely crazy to them. They do not understand, why would you go to someone else for help whenever I'm smart enough and I can figure out what the reasons are? The next one that we have for this is that for that, it's like, how do you make peace with yourself? How do you give yourself the chance to be wrong? How do you actually do, because that's why I said is for every one of us who is creative, our backstory is different. How we got here is different. Where we went to school is different. It's always going to be different than somebody else. So you always look at somebody else and say, well, you're different, and that difference must be a weakness. And for me, it's not. Like the difference is really a strength. And the last one is, the next one we have for this is the individualist. These are people that feel like, look, if I ask for help, if I go out there and ask a question, it's going to show that I don't know what I'm doing. And so this is like people who will say, I don't need anybody's help, I can do it on my own. A lot of sentences that start with the word I. And so here again, I think that these are things you need to really figure out. How do you start to trust people? How do you start to bring people together and say, look, these are people that I can trust and start to share with, start to externalize my creative process as opposed to holding it all on the inside, which is scary as hell. Because whenever you do that, people might not like it. And what does that mean? I think finally then we have experts. And experts are sort of interesting because I think they're the ones that almost feel like they tricked somebody, like they tricked their employer into hiring them. They didn't really know what they were getting into, but somehow I skated by. And so for experts, these are people that are really going out and they never feel like they know enough. They're constantly doing training. They're constantly trying to learn more. They're constantly like just hoarding everything they can. They don't need it. They just feel like they have to have it. And again, I think that these are the people that were instead, I would start to coach you on and say, look, think about actually learning things whenever you need it. Understand that not knowing something is actually okay. And that way to work at something can be really, really beneficial. Now, the other thing I would encourage you to do, the best teams that I work with will do an exercise that looks a lot like this. And each person on the team will actually go through and map out what are their difference. And so this one, in front of the world and everybody else, this is me, right? That Superman and Superwoman, real big problem for me, because I never feel like I'm that terribly creative. But the ability to do this, to have a conversation around this, to put it out in the open with a lot of these things, it's like the behaviors that we talked about. None of this stuff is rocket science. But what seems to be rocket science is the ability to write it down, to share it with other people, and to say, look, how do we hold each other accountable to this, instead of just shoving it away in a corner and pretending like it doesn't exist, and then not understanding why we keep getting mad at each other. So here's the thought that I want to leave you with. Is that if we really want to talk about emotional innovation, if you want to talk about how can your company be more like, because the thing that I've discovered, I spent a year and a half traveling the world working with all these companies. What is holding us back is not our ability to do better designs. What is holding us back is not our ability to have better ideas or anything else. What is holding us back is our ability to deal with all the bullshit that surrounds that and is inside of us. Because the ability, like I can tell you, vulnerability and honesty will become the new hallmarks of leadership. Because that's all that we want, is we just want to work for a company that's not insane. I want to work for a leader who's not insane. And I think that to be able to do that requires several things. Again, you all just thought of a boss that you either have or had in the not too distant future. The first part of that requires courage. You need to stand up and stand for something. It is amazing to me how many people will sit on the sidelines and complain about what should be the first person to run up the hill. Because what I can tell you indisputably is that yes, people will make fun of you. Yes, it is going to be hard. But the thing that is going to happen is the same people who make fun of you, the same people who tell you you are crazy, as soon as you find some success, those same people will seek you out for that exact same reason. Because you have the courage to do something that they never did. And to say that that's the way it's always been, so that's the way it should be, is bullshit. Honestly, comfort is the enemy of greatness. I think vulnerability, honesty, the ability to admit that we are not perfect, the ability to say that these are things that I am working on. Again, vulnerability is not for everybody, but it's an important part of this, which means that at some point you have to risk something. Think about the person that you love the most, the one that you think is the most creative, the artist, the musician, whoever that is. History does not remember well-behaved people. It remembers people who do things differently, who take risks. That's why I don't understand everybody who wants to stand out by acting like everyone else. It forces you to be able to take a risk. And as a part of that, part of this is emotional exposure. Again, whenever I go into change companies, I'm not starting with a process. It's starting with a lot of these sort of basic things, and to get them, because if they're able to understand and do these things, if these are rewarded instead of being punished, those are the companies that win. Those are the companies that excel. And that's why for me, whenever I talk about where do we need to go with this stuff, this is what it is. Look at your life. Look at what you are doing. I can guarantee you that whatever your story is, however insecure you are about it, however much you think it's different or other people don't care about it, you're wrong. And I can tell you because this is why I do this. Because in the last year, to tell you how serious this is, I've had 4 people within this year tell me that they tried to kill themselves because they felt so disenfranchised because they didn't fit in. They felt so alienated about their creativity. This is what I want all of us to do, to raise your voice at your company and in your life. Stand for something. For whatever that is, make sure that you exist loudly. Thanks so much. I also know how serious it is to get a reaction like that from a German audience because, like, for years I'd speak in Austria and Germany, I'd get off stage and like, oh my God, I sucked. And they're like, no, we're just not good at doing emotions in groups. So thank you.
The wisdom of the crowd. Sometimes the crowd is wise, Stephen. So I've just a question for you. I think it's really important in companies, and luckily it's something that we converse about today, and we probably didn't 10 years ago, that people feel comfortable enough and trusted enough to be vulnerable and honest and open and reflective and openly reflective. Is there a risk that some people will, latch onto this as a kind of a trend and try to kind of, I suppose, take that and say, oh, I think I'm going to get vulnerable now, and do you think some people misunderstand that and think it's something that you can just kind of hang on yourself as a kind of a brand?
Yeah.
Do you see that around you sometimes?
No, I think there definitely is. I think there's a lot of people who parade around with honesty in quotes. Right? I think there's a lot of, like, you've watched enough TED Talks, you've watched enough things that I can show up, I can sound really vulnerable, I can say or I'm going to use it as a crutch so that you don't come down as hard on me. And again, I think that this is something where it is up to, and for me, that's why something like behaviors is really important, because when you craft those, it gives us all a way to hold each other accountable. Because in most companies, what happens is we're only accountable when the leader's in the room. And then when the leader's not in the room and there's a problem, well, either I have to accept the way that person is acting, or I have to be an asshole, neither one of which are good outcomes. But I think that this is the age of authenticity, right? Like, this is the age of it being sincere, because I think that those are going to be the teams who are able to show up honestly. Those are the ones that really are able to be the most creative, because it is about risk. And I think you're not going to do that if I don't trust, on the one hand, that the people want the best out of me and are going to demand it, but also that whenever I risk, it's about how do I build on your idea, not how do I wait for the silence so that I can say what I actually think instead.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to be strategic and political and all of that and actually genuinely plug in and get the best out of yourself.
That's what I mean. And I said that a little bit before. I think for most companies, if what matters is the political battles, go work someplace else, right? Because I think that if it's about who's right, I've been married for 20 years because it's not about who's right. We all know that she's right in case somebody knows her. But I just think that's that sort of part, is if it's about that kind of emotional dynamic about who wins.
Yeah.
Like, that's what kills me when companies talk about, oh, if we win.
Yeah.
This is an infinite game. There's not an end.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, I think he deserves one more round of applause. Stephen Gates, thanks a million.
Thank you.
Pleasure.